My dad used to say I was the mistake in the family while my brother was the future. But after I built a name for myself, he was the first one asking for a chance to reconnect. My name is Aaron, and for most of my childhood, my dad treated me like I was the extra kid he never planned for. He didn't hide it. He said it in small ways first, like when he'd joke about how my brother came at the right time and I showed up by accident. He didn't even try to take the edge off it. He said it with the same tone he used when talking about a bill he forgot to pay or a dent in his truck door. When I was old enough to understand what he meant, it landed the way he wanted it to. My brother, 3 years older, was the one he talked about like he had a future set aside for him. Football, grades, friends, whatever made him look good. My brother wasn't even that impressive, but my dad turned every small win into proof that he made the right choices as a father. When it came to me, he acted like the best move he ever made was surviving the fact that I existed. Mom tried to play the middle ground, but she wasn't built to challenge him. She hated conflict, so she let the imbalance grow because it was easier than calling him out. She told me he didn't mean it, even when she saw the effect it had. She tried to make up for it in ways that didn't help, like buying me things when she felt guilty or telling me I was stronger than I thought. None of it changed the simple truth that I grew up in a house where one kid got attention and the other got comments that sat in the back of his mind long after the day ended. By the time I turned 18, I already understood I couldn't wait for them to wake up and treat me differently. I left home fast. I didn't even make it a dramatic exit. I packed a few bags, told my parents I was moving in with a friend, and left before my dad came home. I didn't want to hear him say something that would stick with me for another 10 years. I worked jobs that most people quit after a week. Warehouse gigs, night shifts, fast food, whatever paid enough to keep rent covered. I wasn't trying to build a story about resilience. I just had to keep moving because stopping meant thinking about how I started. When you grow up being told you're the mistake, normal pressure feels heavier. Every failure feels like proof he was right. Every slow month feels like he's somewhere shaking his head, saying he expected this. The only thing that helped was the work itself. When you stay moving, you don't have time to replay old conversations in your head. Staying busy became my normal. I didn't care what anyone thought of the jobs I took. I didn't care how long it took to build something stable. I just kept going because going back home wasn't an option. It took years for things to change. Not in some dramatic, overnight way. More like stacking small steps until they start turning into something real. I took classes at night. Nothing fancy. Basic courses to help me get into a training program I found through a guy at work. The program wasn't huge, but it was solid, and most people who finished it ended up with good jobs. I didn't think I'd get in at first, but I pushed through it because I needed something to break the cycle I grew up in. The program wasn't easy, but it felt like the first thing I ever did that wasn't tied to how my dad talked about me. It was mine. I put the hours in, kept my head down, and finished it. After that, things shifted. Slowly, but enough that I felt it. I got hired by a company that valued skill over background. They didn't care who my dad favored or what I heard growing up. They cared that I showed up and did my job better than most people. When you come from a house where praise is rare, even small recognition hits like a new language. I didn't talk to my parents much during those years. Holidays came and went with short texts. My brother stayed in contact with them, which didn't surprise me. He still lived in the world where he was the favorite. He still got the soft comments, the easy support, the reminders that he was the one who made sense. I didn't resent him for it. It wasn't his doing, but I didn't pretend we were close either. We lived in different stories. The first real shift came after the company I worked for put my name on a project that ended up getting attention in my field. Not huge public attention, nothing like that. Just enough that my work started getting recognized by people who mattered. Enough that I felt stable for the first time in my adult life. Enough that my name showed up in a place my dad never imagined it would. The funny thing is when your life finally gets traction, the people who ignored you before somehow hear about it faster than the people who supported you. My dad reached out a few months after the project went public. He called me one morning while I was getting ready for work. His voice sounded careful, like he wasn't sure if the number would even work. He started with small talk, which wasn't his style. He never talked without a reason. After a few minutes, he shifted into the real purpose. He said he wanted a chance to fix things. He didn't call an apology. He didn't say he was wrong. He framed it like something broke in the house, and he wanted me to help him repair it. He talked like the years of comments, the imbalance, the blame, the silence, all of it were things we could rewrite if we just sat down and talked it out. I didn't jump into anything. I listened the whole time. I didn't interrupt him. I wanted to hear how he explained the gap between us. He talked about wanting a fresh start. He said age changed how he looked at things. He said he didn't want the past to define our relationship. It sounded like he prepared the lines ahead of time. When he finished, I didn't say much. I told him I needed time before I answered anything. He tried to push. He always pushed when things didn't follow the path he pictured. He said the longer I waited, the harder it would be to fix what happened. He said he didn't want to lose his chance. I told him we'd talk later and hung up before he could pull me into the same old pattern where he talked, and I listened without saying what I thought. A week passed before I agreed to meet him. I didn't decide out of curiosity or hope. I just wanted to say what I had held in for years without him cutting me off or shifting the blame. I chose a quiet spot in a park near where he lived. Neutral ground, open space, no walls to make things feel tight. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with his hands folded like someone waiting for a meeting they couldn't afford to mess up. He stood as soon as he saw me, but I didn't let that turn into anything. I nodded, sat on the opposite end, and kept enough distance that he couldn't mistake this for a warm start. He opened with the same soft tone he used on the phone, the one that felt strange coming from him. He said he was glad I agreed. He said he'd been thinking all week. He said he didn't want to waste a chance. He kept circling around the topic without naming it, like he wanted me to carry the conversation the same way I used to carry the blame. I didn't let it drag. I started with the thing that shaped everything. I told him how his comments about me being the mistake didn't land as jokes. They stuck. They shaped how I looked at myself. They shaped how I made choices. They shaped how much effort it took to believe I wasn't doomed to fail before I started. He didn't look at me when I said any of that. His eyes kept drifting over the park like he was trying to find a safe place to put his attention. He tried to speak a few times, but I didn't stop. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I just laid each part of it out so he could hear what he built without pretending it wasn't there. I talked about school, how he treated every small success for my brother like proof he was raising a winner, how he brushed off anything I did as something I should have done better, how he made it clear which of us he thought had potential and which one he thought was barely keeping up. I brought up how I started working young, not because I wanted extra cash, but because I didn't want to be around long enough for him to turn another afternoon into a reminder that I wasn't the kid he wanted. I talked about leaving the house at 18 because staying meant shrinking myself to make his life easier. Every sentence had weight to me, but I didn't add anything extra to make it sound heavy. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. He tried to respond halfway through. He said he was under pressure back then. He said he didn't mean the things he said the way they came out. He said parents say things they regret. He tried to lean into the idea that he was just stressed, not cruel. I told him I wasn't there for excuses. I told him pressure didn't force him to say those things. He chose them. I told him I didn't buy the idea that he didn't know how it sounded. He knew. He said them because he believed them. He fell silent again, but this time he didn't try to jump back in. He sat still, hands clasped together, eyes on the ground. His face didn't show much. My dad was never expressive. He didn't know how to show regret without turning it into a performance. But this time he didn't try. Maybe because he knew trying would just make it worse. I moved on to the part that hit me the hardest over the years. I told him how I built my entire adult life with no support. How I worked jobs that burned people out within months. How I kept going without ever getting a call asking if I needed anything. How he showed more interest in my brother's low-effort wins than anything I pushed myself through. I told him I wasn't telling him all this to make him feel bad. I wasn't there to punish him. I wanted honesty. Not the kind he used when he wanted to look like a reasonable parent. Actual clarity. When I said that, he finally looked up. Not defensive, not angry. Just tired. He said he didn't know what to say. He said he wished he had handled things differently. But even then, he didn't call it what it was. He didn't say he favored my brother. He didn't say he saw me as less. He didn't say he pushed me away instead of helping me grow. He kept things vague, the way people do when they want to sound honest without stepping into the full truth. I told him that wasn't enough. I said if he wanted to fix anything, he had to say the simple part out loud. He had to state what he actually did instead of circling around it. He didn't speak. He stayed quiet long enough that I realized he wasn't going to give me that moment. Not because he didn't understand it, but because admitting it out loud would force him to see himself the way I saw him. That silence told me more than anything he had said so far. I stood up. He looked at me like he could feel the moment slipping. He asked if we could talk again soon. He asked if this was at least a step. I told him I needed time. Real time. Not a week. Not a quick follow-up. I told him I didn't want another conversation until he was ready to be completely truthful instead of leaning on excuses. He tried to say something else, but I shook my head and left before he could drag the moment into another cycle of half-answers. Walking away felt steady. No rush, no heat, no shaking hands. Just a clear sense that I said what I needed to say, and he heard every part of it, even if he didn't know what to do with it. For the first time in my life, the weight wasn't on me to fix anything. The next move was on him, and I didn't know whether he'd make it or not. The week after the confrontation felt quieter than I expected. I didn't wait for him to reach out, and he didn't. The silence didn't bother me. It felt like the first break I'd had in years where I wasn't bracing for his voice in the back of my head. I went to work, kept my routine, and left the rest alone. I figured a long pause was the only honest next step. Then my brother reached out. He texted first, which was normal. He never called unless something was wrong. Seeing his name pop up didn't surprise me. The timing did. His message was short, asking if we could talk about this thing with Dad. Nothing else. No hint of what he heard. No hint of what he wanted. I agreed to a call. I didn't want anything building in the background without knowing what was being said. He called later that night. His tone was casual at first, but it shifted quickly. He said Dad told him I was being dramatic. He said Dad claimed I was twisting history. He said Dad believed I was trying to make him look like a bad parent now that my life had turned out well. My brother didn't sound shocked saying any of that. He said it like he already decided what version he believed. I didn't react. I let him finish the whole rundown. Dad saying I held on to things too long. Dad saying I never understood how tough fatherhood was. Dad saying I was oversensitive as a kid. The same lines he'd used for years, just dressed up as explanations instead of comments. When my brother stopped talking, I asked him one question. What did he think happened when we were growing up? He hesitated. Not long, but long enough that it told me everything. He said he remembered Dad being strict. He said Dad pushed me harder because he thought I needed it. He said he didn't think it was as bad as I made it sound. He kept using soft wording to avoid saying he knew there was a difference between how we were treated. I told him everything. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a rant. Just straight facts. I laid out the comments, the comparisons, the constant pressure, the imbalance. I told him about the nights where I stayed out late just to avoid walking into a house where one kid got praise and the other got distance. I told him how Dad never showed up for anything I did, but made time for every minor thing he did. I kept it clear and direct. He went quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, he didn't deny any of it. He said he remembered some of the comments. He remembered Dad calling me the mistake when he thought I wasn't listening. He remembered how different the reactions were whenever he did something average and I did something good. He remembered how Dad talked about us behind closed doors, splitting us into two roles. Him as the one with potential and me as the one who just needed to cope. He admitted he saw it. He admitted he never said anything. He said he didn't know how to push back without making his own life harder. He said Dad expected him to play along, and he did because it kept things smooth. Hearing that didn't bring any clarity or relief. It was just confirmation. It showed me the gap wasn't something I imagined. It was something even he saw but chose to ignore to keep his comfort. I told him I didn't blame him for being the favored one. That wasn't his fault. But I also said I wasn't going to pretend we were equal in this situation. He lived in a version of our family that benefited him. I lived in the version that didn't. Acting like the two stories were the same was dishonest. He didn't argue. He said he wished he spoke up more when we were younger. He said he wished he had done something. But wishing didn't change anything. It didn't erase years of distance. It didn't erase the fact that he let things stay uneven because it worked in his favor. After that, the call hit a flat point. There was nothing else to say without dragging the conversation into circles. He asked if I wanted us to talk more often after this. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I didn't want to give an answer I didn't mean. I told him I didn't want to build anything forced. I told him I wasn't trying to rebuild old family roles. I wasn't going to fight for closeness if the only thing holding it together was guilt or habit. If he wanted a relationship, it had to come from us, not from trying to prove something to Dad or fix the past. He said he understood. I believed he meant it in that moment. But understanding didn't erase years of distance. It didn't make us close. It just made the truth clear that we were adults who grew up in the same house but lived different lives inside it. After the call, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt clear. The part of my life that involved hoping my brother would step up or see things from my side was done. I wasn't waiting for his approval. I wasn't waiting for him to acknowledge the imbalance again. He said his piece. I said mine. That was enough. What mattered most was how I moved forward, not how the family tried to repaint the past. I didn't expect Dad to hear anything different from him. My brother wasn't going to challenge him in a way that forced him to admit anything. That wasn't his role in the family. He was the one Dad protected, not the one Dad critiqued. So I didn't expect anything to change. I also didn't feel the need to correct anything Dad told him. I already lived through the reality of it. I didn't need anyone else to validate it. In the days that followed, my brother kept his distance. Not in a cold way, more in a cautious way, like he didn't know how to talk to me without the old pattern between us guiding the conversation. I didn't push him either. I wasn't trying to force something from someone who spent most of our lives watching things happen from a safe angle. That space between us became the clearest sign of where we stood. Not enemies, not close, just two people who finally saw the same truth but didn't know how to move from it. I accepted that. Instead of trying to fix the past through him, I focused on my life, the one I built without their help, the one that didn't depend on them, the one that kept me steady. That was the point where the gap between me and my family stopped being a weight and became a line I didn't need to cross anymore. The event was held in a rented hall downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was the kind of place people use for things that mattered. I had been nominated months earlier, long before any of this with my father started. The committee told me they wanted to highlight a project I had built from scratch, something I worked on with long nights and no safety net. It felt like progress I earned without anyone dragging me backward. When the night came, I went alone. I didn't bring friends or coworkers. I didn't want noise around me. I wanted to stand there as the person who worked for this, not the person who needed a group to show confidence. I checked into the desk, got my badge, and moved through the entrance. That was when I saw him. He stood near the center of the crowd, not even trying to stay hidden. He had a drink in his hand and a smile he used at family gatherings, the one that made him look like he knew people were watching. He talked to anyone who came close. He didn't act confused about being there. He acted like he belonged. He acted like someone invited him. My name was on posters around the room. A photo. A short write-up. He stood next to one and kept glancing at it like he was checking the weather. A few people must have asked if he was related to me, because I saw him nod and talk with them like he had been in my corner since day one. I waited a few minutes before walking over. I didn't want to create a scene in the middle of the hall. I wanted to stay composed, even if he wasn't. He saw me coming and straightened his shirt like it made a difference. He said he came because he wanted to support me. He said he was proud. He said this was a big moment for our family. He didn't use the word mistake. He didn't mention the years he tried to shape me into someone who never spoke up. He only talked about the version of me he could present to strangers. He pointed at the poster and said he always knew I had this in me. He said moments like this proved everything he used to tell me about working hard and pushing forward. He talked like he had been the one giving me direction. He talked like I was the product of his guidance and not the person who built everything in spite of him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to shame him in front of anyone. I told him in a quiet tone to stop using my achievements to clear his record. I told him I didn't want him telling people he shaped my work. I told him I didn't come here to fix our history. I came here to accept recognition I earn on my own. He tried to keep a smile, but it fell a little. He tried to say he didn't mean it like that, but the way he talked to the crowd showed the truth. He came because the room made him look connected to something successful. He came because it gave him a position he didn't earn. I stepped back and told him I wanted the night without his presence attached to it. I told him he could stay if he wanted, but not near me, not near the people I needed to talk to, and not near the places where my work was being shown. I didn't tell him to leave the event. I just told him he wasn't part of my moment. His eyes shifted for a second, the same way they did when he used to realize he had said too much but didn't want to admit it. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just nodded like he couldn't think of anything else to say. I walked away. I didn't check if he stayed behind me. I didn't look for him again. I focused on the event, the people who asked real questions, the conversations that weren't tied to old wounds. The night went on without him shaping it, and that was enough for me. When the event ended, I left through a side exit. I didn't want to risk running into him on the way out. I stepped into the cool air, took a breath, and kept moving. The night belonged to the work, not the past. My father asked for one last talk 2 weeks after the event. He sent a short message. He said he did not want to fight, and he did not want to repeat what happened outside the venue. I waited a full day before answering because I did not want to walk into anything unprepared. When I agreed, I chose a small public spot where the noise of other people would keep things calm. I told him the place and the time, and I made sure he knew the talk would not last long if he pushed for anything I did not want to discuss. I reached the place 10 minutes early. He showed up on time, which was rare for him. When he sat down, he did not start with the usual small talk he used to use to dodge real topics. He kept his hands on the table and stayed quiet for a moment. He looked older, not in the sense of age, but in the sense of someone who had run out of excuses to hide behind. He said he wanted to give a real apology, not the kind where he blamed stress or work or pressure, not the kind where he tried to shift the weight toward anyone but himself. He kept his voice steady while he said he knew what he did. He said he knew he had marked our home with a tone that made it clear who mattered and who did not. He admitted he defended my brother even when he did not need to, and ignored me even when I needed support. He kept his eyes on the table while he talked, which made it clear he was not trying to perform anything for me. He said there was no excuse for treating one child like the only one who had value. He said he knew he shaped how I viewed myself for years, and he knew he never asked what I needed. He said he used to think being a parent meant choosing a lead child so the family had someone to build around. He said he thought giving all the attention to my brother made him a good father because it felt like pushing the strongest one forward. He said he never stopped to ask if he was hurting the other one in the process. Hearing him admit that out loud put pressure in my chest. It was not anger. It was more like a weight I carried for so long that I forgot what it felt like when someone else held even a small piece of it. I let him finish without saying anything because I did not want to interrupt something he should have said years ago. He said he had watched me build a life without him. He said he realized that every win I earned came from my effort alone, and that this truth bothered him more than he expected. He said he used to believe that telling someone they were a mistake was a way to toughen them, but now he knew it only pushed them away. He said he saw how far I went, and he knew he had no part in it, and that made him face everything he tried to ignore. I listened to all of it without giving him any sign of how I felt. When he was done, he waited. He looked nervous, not in a dramatic way, but in the way someone looks when they know they might not get another chance to fix something. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I told him I heard what he said. I told him his words did not erase the past, but they mattered in the present. I told him I did not need him to explain why he did what he did, because I lived through enough of it to understand the pattern without hearing the reasoning behind it. I told him what I needed was honesty, not stories about stress or work or pressure, and he had finally given me that. But I also told him something he did not want to hear. I told him I accepted the apology, but I did not want to rebuild the same type of relationship we had before. I told him I did not trust fast changes, and I did not want him to expect instant closeness. I said respect needed to come through actions over time, not through a single talk. He took a slow breath, then nodded. He did not try to convince me otherwise. He did not try to guilt me into any promise. He did not bring up family or obligation or how blood matters. He just said he understood. That alone showed me he had at least heard what I said in past talks, even if he never admitted it before. I told him I needed space. I told him I was not shutting the door, but I was not opening it wide either. I said I would decide how much contact made sense, and he did not get to control that part anymore. He accepted that without pushing back. That was new for him. We kept the rest of the talk short. He stood up first. He said he would try to do better, not to win anything from me, but because he wanted to live the years ahead without repeating the same behavior. He said he wanted to fix what he could, even if it never turned into the relationship he once pretended we had. When he walked away, I did not feel like anything big had shifted. It was more like the air in the room had cleared after a long time. I did not forgive everything. I did not forget anything. But I closed one chapter without forcing myself to feel emotions I did not have. I sat for a few minutes after he left, not to reflect in some dramatic way, but to let the talk settle. It felt like something that needed to happen, not something that solved everything. It gave both of us a place to stand where the past was no longer hanging over every sentence we exchanged. When I got up to leave, I knew nothing would change overnight. I also knew I did not want it to. Slow steps made more sense. I wanted proof, not promises. I wanted consistency, not short bursts of regret. And for the first time, he seemed willing to accept that without trying to shape the story around himself. That was enough for the moment. My name had started to carry weight by the time my father tried to steady his behavior. I could see he was trying to show effort without asking for praise, which was new for him. He kept his distance, didn't try to act close, and didn't mention the past unless I brought it up. I watched it with caution because I had seen him switch roles many times in my childhood. This time, his tone stayed even and he didn't turn things into guilt or pity. I kept my guard up. Years of his comments shaped how I read people. Back then, I thought every change came with a hidden plan attached. So I didn't rush into anything. I didn't close the door either. I answered his messages when they stayed respectful. I kept the talk short and clear. He accepted that, which helped lower the tension. My work was steady at that time. I spent most days on projects that kept me out of the cycle I grew up in. I didn't feel the need to compare myself with my brother anymore. That part of my life had burned out long ago. My brother stayed quiet after the last talk we had. He didn't ask to fix anything. He didn't bring up the past. He didn't fight for distance either. He just moved into his own routine and let the gap stay open. For the first time, that didn't bother me. Growing up, I thought siblings were supposed to act like a built-in support system. But I reached a point where I understood he didn't fill that role because he didn't know how, and neither did I. We were raised in a house where one person was lifted and the other one was blamed. That shaped both of us in different ways. He stayed in the role that made life easier for him. I fought out of the one I was pushed into. That difference never closed. I stopped expecting it to. My father kept going with small steps. Nothing big or dramatic. He would check in without pressure, ask simple questions about my work, and not make them about him. When he came to events, he stood in the back and didn't bring people over to talk about me. That was new. The version of him I grew up with would have done anything for the attention. Now he stayed quiet. Even with the change, I didn't feel close to him. I didn't feel distance either. It was like dealing with someone who used to know me but didn't anymore, and I didn't feel the need to fix that. I didn't hate him. I just didn't carry any role he used to assign to me. I wasn't the mistake, the problem, or the one who had to prove anything. I was just someone living a life outside of that old structure. The years of work I put into myself showed up in day-to-day moments. Things that used to make me tense didn't hit the same way. When he slipped into old patterns, he caught himself before they took over the conversation. When he apologized, he didn't repeat the behavior the next week. He stayed steady in a way I had never seen. But even with that, I didn't let him into the parts of my life he used to control. I kept my circle small. The people around me were ones who supported me without expecting something in return. They didn't care about titles or recognition. They were there because we built trust from real things, not family roles. My father tried to ask about them once, not in a pushy way, but in a curious one. I didn't shut it down, but I didn't open the door wide either. I told him enough to answer the question, nothing more. It wasn't out of anger. It was out of understanding what I needed to stay stable. When holidays came around, I didn't feel the pull to repeat old traditions. I didn't feel the need to sit at a table that used to make me tense. Instead, I spent those days with people who didn't treat me like a backup plan. It felt strange the first year, but it became natural after that. My father didn't argue about it. He didn't try to guilt me. He just said he hoped I enjoyed the time. That alone showed he had changed more than I expected. My brother and I kept a polite distance. We sent simple messages on birthdays or important dates, nothing more. The silence between us didn't feel heavy. It was just the shape our relationship had taken. I didn't feel the need to force something that never existed in a real way. Sometimes things stay unsaid because they would only reopen old ground. What mattered most was the life I built outside all of that. A life made from choices that came from what I wanted rather than what I was trying to prove. I didn't carry the need to fix anyone. I didn't carry the need to be understood by people who didn't try to understand me when it mattered. My father's effort stayed steady for a long time. I respected the work he put in, but I didn't see him as someone I needed to rebuild a full bond with. I kept the door open just enough to let the present stand on its own, separate from the past. In the end, I didn't rebuild the family I was born into. I built a new one with people who came into my life because of shared effort, not obligation. The old structure stayed behind. The new one came from choice. That was enough. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and lets us bring you more and better stories.